Writing about plays is very different from writing about novels or poems because the medium is characters interacting in space and time on the stage. So think stage, not page. This means you need to get into the habit of paying attention to things that normally you wouldn't have to think about, especially when writing about an extract question. This mnemonic will help you to do that. Start with sequencing and setting. You need to explore continuity and contrast between the different scenes. For example, public and private, many characters or few characters. Is it tense or relaxed? Is it mainly about action or reflection? Think about where the action of this scene fits into the overall structure of the play. Is it part of the conflict? Is it part of the climax? Is it part of the falling action or resolution? How does it fit into the overall structure? Also think about what Shakespeare does with time. How quickly do the events of the scene take place? How much time has elapsed since the previous scene? Remember, there were no curtains between scenes or acts, and no interval either. So you need to ask yourself how and why the scenes interlock or dovetail. You should also pay very careful attention to the information at the beginning of the scenes, thinking about who, what, when, where, and why. How do characters enter and leave? Visualize their gestures and looks. For Elizabethans, sartorial distinctions as emblems of social rank were essential and omnipresent. There were also 3 parts of the stage. The platform extending into the audience, used for asides and soliloquies. The upper stage, used for balconies, parapets, towers or windows. And the inner stage, used for prison, burial chambers, often bedrooms or hatching out plans. So think about where on stage the action is likely to be set. Maybe it's set on different levels. You should also be thinking about lines in speeches that work like special effects. The Shakespearean stage was almost empty. You might have perhaps a curtain or sign bearing the name of a place, but otherwise the focus was the actor and the text. So how are the mood and atmosphere evoked? The text is a bit like a musical score that your imagination has to play. When thinking about how the plot is developed, you need to ask yourself, why does Shakespeare have this character say this in these words to that character at this particular moment? How are the frequency and length of the character's appearances in different scenes being handled and why? What are some of the threads leading forwards and backwards from each scene in a network? What do the audience know that the characters don't? What questions do we still have? Is suspense and tension going up? Sympathy, fear, pity? Drama primarily consists in dialogue. Look for a wide range of styles and think about shifts in the language as well. You might consider changes between verse and prose, the sacred and the profane, the serious and the comic. What causes the changes and what is their effect? Look for irregular or fragmentary lines. Think about why interlocking half lines are sometimes used in rapid dialogue. All these are practical dramatic tools used for particular purposes in particular situations. They're not just technical oddities. Tension and conflict is the main thing you should be exploring. Are we getting first impressions of a character, or are we now developing deeper insights? How do the character's words, gestures, and bearing combine? How has the character's language modified as the play has moved on? What role is memory playing, or reminiscences, or visions? You should also think about what each character is after in each scene and overall. How are they moving closer to their goals? What are their motives? What characters might stand in their way? How old or important is each character? How does this affect the dialogue? How are differences in sex or social status important? Nietzsche said that a good question to ask when reading any philosopher is, what is he most afraid of? And that's a good question to ask of Shakespeare's characters too, especially in the tragedies. What is the character most afraid of at this time and why? Tension can be between characters, but sometimes the most intense tension is actually internal, within a character. In what ways is the character being pulled in different directions internally? Plays don't have narrators. The closest we get to that is the ancient Greek chorus. So it's quite difficult for the playwright to actually tell us what characters are thinking or feeling directly. A soliloquy can go some way towards doing that, but there are limitations on its use. It can become awkward and intrusive if it's relied upon too heavily. Instead, then, we often have to be shown exactly what's happening. So think about how the character is revealing any internal tensions or conflicts implicitly rather than explicitly. Be attuned to what they say, but also how they say it, to whom, and also their reactions to other characters. Sometimes it's also about what they don't say, rather than just what they do say. In connection with that, characters who are on stage, but silent, are also very important because they change the dynamics of the interactions of the characters radically. Characters might play different parts depending on who's watching. Antillabe or shared lines between characters where the iambic pentameter interlocks across two shorter lines is another factor to consider. Think about how it might show connections or contrasts between characters and how it might affect the pace of the scene. Related to that are rhythm and rhyme. Remember that Shakespeare's plays are written in, for the most part, verse rather than prose, so we need to think about why that's the case. Verse is often about signalling social status or subject matter, but it can also reveal emotional fluctuations in the character's state of mind. Which words are most stressed and why? At what points is the character's meter relatively regular? Where does it become irregular and why? There are often couplets at the end of scenes to signal the conclusion to them. That's in place of a curtain between scenes. But are the couplets merely decorative, or does the rhyme capture something important about some of the main themes or tensions of the scene? Finally, to avoid repeating yourself and therefore not gaining any extra marks at the end of your essay, especially when answering on an extract, challenge yourself to pick out which one detail you think is the most dramatic and to explain why.